Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Stories Sustain Us. I'm your host, Steven Schauer, and today we have a truly inspiring guest on the show. I'm thrilled to have ecologist Dr. Maura Dudley on the show to share her journey with us. We'll talk about how family influence can play a significant role in shaping a passion for environmental conservation. And we'll learn about Dr. Dudley's research, which focuses on freshwater ecosystems and the protection of these important habitats. We'll also learn about some of the amazing creatures she is working to save. For example, did you know turtles have remained relatively unchanged over evolutionary time, and that salamanders, get this, are really cool? You're going to want to stick around to learn more about these truly fascinating creatures as we dive into her wonderful work. Let me take a moment to properly introduce Dr. Dudley, and then we'll jump into the interview. At an early age, Dr. Maura Dudley developed a love for turtles, which, by the way, are one of my favorite creatures. This passion for turtles led her to study freshwater ecosystems and pursue a PhD in ecology. Dr. Dudley's vision for a better future is one where all people have equal access to resources and coexist with diverse species, fostering empathy and compassion. She emphasizes the importance of finding a job that you love because it will never feel like work. And that's the truth as I see it too. One of Dr. Dudley's current jobs is with the Amphibian Foundation, a nonprofit organization focused on amphibian conservation and education with a mission to help conserve amphibians. Sadly, if you didn't know it, they are globally threatened. In just a few minutes, you'll learn more from Dr. Dudley about all the amazing work the Amphibian Foundation is doing in the longleaf pine and rural grazing ecosystems in the southeastern United States, as well as the urban environment in Atlanta, Georgia. So, let's jump into the interview. Get ready to be inspired by Dr. Maura Dudley's incredible work here on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. All right. Well, welcome, Dr. Dudley. How are you doing, Maura? It's been a long time since I've seen you in person, but it's great to see you online.
It's great to see you too. Great to see you too, Steven.
Yeah. So for everybody listening or watching, just for a little bit of transparency, I knew Dr. Dudley and Maura when she was still Maura years ago. I was trying to figure it out. Do you remember how long ago that was? I was thinking it was at least a decade ago.
2010 to 2012.
Yeah,
so when I worked for the San Antonio River.
Yeah, so a dozen years ago already was the last time we had kind of regular contact, and I was pre-PhD and pre-3 children and pre-exciting life that you're living out in Atlanta. It's been a joy to kind of watch you kind of blossom and grow into this, everything that you have going on in your life. One of the benefits of social media, there's so many not so good things about social media, but that's certainly one of the nice things, is that I've been able to keep up with you over the years, and I'm so happy for you and your family and everything that you've been able to accomplish over the years since we last worked together.
Yeah, I totally agree about social media. I think it's one of the best parts about it.
So let's do what we do on the show, and we're going to learn a little bit about you before we get into some of the things that you're doing professionally these days. So tell us more. Tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get to be Dr. Dudley? Where did you grow up? What was life like for you as a kid? What were some kind of major milestones along the way?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this, and I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and to me, there's sort of two sides to where I came to this point right now. One is sort of the environmental side, and one is sort of the animal loving side. So the environmental side I trace back to my great grandmother, who was a young adult during the Great Depression, and because of out of necessity, growing up in that time, she was very conscious of not wasting things.
Yeah.
And that consciousness was passed to my grandmother, who was then passed to my mom and passed it to me. And so I kind of grew up in this household where we were very conscious about not wasting, reusing, recycling. And there's this really great story about my dad and his support of me in this. And when I was in middle school, they let middle schoolers kind of work at the church bingo.
Yeah.
And one of our jobs was at the end of the night, we would go and take all the garbage bags, that the individual garbage bags people had collected, and put them in the garbage. Well, I went around to each of the tables and I would see all these cans that were recyclable. And so I just got a bag and I started pulling them out. And I would have this big bag at the end of the night and I would put it in the back of my dad's Subaru. And inevitably, there was always a leak in the bag. He got soda all over the back of his car, or the trunk of his car.
Yeah.
And yet he was so determined not to squash that passion that I had for making a difference with these, these bags of soda cans, that he never stopped me or, kept me from that. So that's kind of the environmental side, and kind of how I got that. When it comes to the animal side, I grew up always loving animals, and I always loved animals that no one else liked.
Yeah.
And one of them in groups in particular was snakes. And of course, this was not my mom's favorite idea. I begged her for a pet snake. And although she did not allow me to have a pet snake, what my mom did was, when this interest in snakes continued, and after my freshman year in college, my mom, who worked at Pitt, said, "Hey, I can get you into a herpetology class for free, but the room and board isn't covered." But I found out that if I did dishes at the field station, that I could pay for my room and board and take this herpetology class for free. So I did, because I loved snakes, and I
Yeah.
quickly learned that I'm too slow for snakes as an animal for a career. But I had never really considered turtles. I was fascinated by them. It was really my first interaction with turtles. And so that was after my freshman year in college. So my sophomore year, I worked at a field station, and I convinced my advisor. I came to her and said, "I want to work with turtles." And she said, "Well, I don't know anything about turtles, but okay," because I was so determined. So I did this study kind of looking at the nesting and habitat preferences of turtles. I then, in my master's program, again convinced an advisor who knew nothing about turtles to let me do something with turtles, because I really loved them. Um, and so then I finished up my master's degree, and for kind of other personal reasons in my life, ended up moving to San Antonio, which is where I joined the San Antonio River Authority, my first real job.
Yeah.
Steven was my first real manager. And I realized that not all managers are as great as Steven, but
Oh, that's
yeah,
very
no, it's a
nice.
really great experience. And what it taught me, and a subsequent experience after I just moved to Atlanta, was I was the education coordinator, and I realized how much I love education, how much that was something that spoke to me. When I moved to Atlanta, I couldn't start my PhD right away, so I worked for an organization called Blue Heron Nature Preserve, and I didn't have a title there. I was doing education. I was a grant writer at one point, and again, really fed into that. So then, when it came to my PhD,
Hmm.
you're wondering, Mara, did you do turtles? And
I,
I really
I've got a lot
considered.
of questions actually, but that's one of them. Yes.
Should I let you ask
No,
those, or?
finish where you're going with your PhD story, and then we'll backtrack in time a little bit, because I'm jotting some
That
notes
sounds
here
great.
about I've got some more questions to ask you about this. But yeah, finish where you were going with the
Yeah.
PhD. So
So what
yes, did you do turtles for your
I
PhD?
didn't. And the reason for that was that when I really reflected on it, I thought, what is going to help turtles the most? And what I felt was that if I studied the ecosystems in which they live, their habitats, and I helped to protect those, that would ultimately help turtles more than me getting a degree in herpetology and studying them directly. And so I went to the University of Georgia, which is one of the few schools that has a PhD in ecology. And I got my PhD in ecology. I actually really wanted to work in urban systems when I was there, and
Yeah.
I was really hopeful when I first started that I would get to work in urban systems. But the one thing that everybody knows about research is you go where there's funding, and there was
Sure.
funding to work in the middle of the Southern Appalachian forests. So that's where I worked for my PhD. And do you want me to get to today and then you can ask me the questions, or do you want to ask them now?
Let me go back in time a little bit. Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
pause
sure.
at working in the Southern Appalachians,
Yes, that
and then
sounds great.
we will eventually catch back up to that, I'm sure.
Okay.
So go back in time a little bit more again. So with your family, are you an only child? Do you have siblings? You'd mentioned
I'm
your
the
mother worked at Pitt. So tell me a little bit
yes.
more, if you don't mind, whatever you're comfortable sharing about your family and upbringing, because it sounds like you had a very incredibly supportive family with the story you shared about your
Yeah,
dad, and then the help and direction your mom gave you in early college years.
yeah. I'm the oldest of two. I have a younger brother. And except for what I sort of indicated in terms of the influence that my great grandmother had in terms of sort of lifestyle. My parents, my mom is a scientist. She is in public health, and so she has really been supportive in terms of guiding me in terms of the science and the education part of pursuing a degree in science, particularly as a woman, and
Mm-hmm.
some of the hurdles that she faced. She was able to help me with. My dad is a lawyer, and he's also the mayor of our local community where I grew up. And my dad, although he didn't really have any science background, he is someone who encourages people to dream and supports those dreams. So he always supported me from kind of an emotional standpoint of never wanting me to hold back, always pushing me to
Yeah.
go for whatever it was. So yeah, it was really important, both of those
Yeah.
um,
What a
things about
great,
my parents.
great combination of that loving support from your father and that emotional support that he was providing you to dream big and get there. And then just all of that undoubtedly incredibly insightful information that your mom could provide you by her having
Yeah,
already paved the way into a scientific career as a female. And I can only imagine the hurdles that she had to face
yeah.
in her era of getting on with her professional career. So what a great
And my
combination.
mom got her PhD when I was, I think when I was 6. So she did it while she had kids, which was really important. And it was really important for me then when I was getting my PhD. I had kids while I was in my PhD, and to be able to
Yeah.
have that role model.
Yeah,
Yeah,
how wonderful. Thank you
yeah.
for sharing that bit about your family. That's just a great story. And I don't know, in all the years, the 2 years that we worked together and everything, I don't know that I ever knew that about your family. Shame on me for not asking that all those years ago, but thank you for telling me now. That's a great story, and I'm happy for you. Um,
Thank you. And actually, let me add one more thing,
yeah,
Stephen.
please.
When I did my turtle work it was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, my parents flew out to visit me that summer. This was my second year in undergrad, and I have a picture somewhere of my parents wearing um, these mosquito net
Mosquito nets,
hats
sure.
because
I was
they
thinking,
came out with me to the field because they wanted to see what I was doing in these turtles that I was working with. So,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely some mosquitoes out there in that area. So,
Yes, yes, yes.
so before we get to turtles, another question that uh, I have to know. There's got to be a story here. You at one point said you learned you were too slow for snakes. How did you learn that? Because that sounds like a very specific thing to say, that you learned you were too slow for snakes.
I wish there was more of a story to that. It was
Yeah.
really the herpetology class that I took was a field-based course, and so we spent a lot of time going out. We would do coursework in the classroom, but then we spent so much time out in the field just looking for things. And I have to tell you, I was the last person to find and catch snakes because I just was not as not as fast as some of the other students in the class. So there is one picture that exists of me holding a snake from that class, and I think someone handed it off to me so that I would have that opportunity.
Okay.
But turtles, we caught in traps, and
Yeah.
I do have to be fast to hog tie snapping turtles, which are do have a degree of speed,
Yeah.
but it's a little different, and so I did learn that skill.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I'm I'm glad the story that I was imagining about you being too slow for snakes was not the reality story, because I'm like, oh no, did she get bit?
no,
What happened? So,
oh
okay.
no, and I still love them so much.
Sure, sure.
I do. Just too slow to work with them.
So, besides being able then to capture the turtles, what about them fascinated you and made you want to get into that early on? And
Hmm.
just as a sidebar, like I think turtles are like my spirit creature. So you
I
know,
think they might be mine too, actually. Uh, so, I mean, as I mentioned, one was logistics. They
yeah.
were easier, but the thing that really, so I should specify that what I'm really interested in were freshwater turtles. So,
Okay. Yeah.
this kind of goes back to my I love animals that others don't love, and I
Mm-hmm.
feel like sea turtles get all the attention. And it's not that I
Sure.
don't love sea turtles, but I always felt like freshwater turtles were like these super cool organisms that no one appreciated, and yet they have been on this earth for so long. Their structure, their physical structure of turtles have remained almost unchanged over evolutionary time. And and not just are turtles as a group old, but individual turtles can be so old. I mean, I remember one time in North Carolina, I was working and box turtles are not aquatic turtles, but we found a box turtle. It had been engraved. And it was at that point had been engraved 90 years before.
Wow.
And it was still, I mean, I think about the things that they've experienced and um, lived through. And I just also, I really love snapping turtles. My son likes to find pictures of snapping turtles from his school books, and he makes his teacher take a picture of him with it to show me because
Nice.
um, they have a grumpy personality in a way, but they're just incredible creatures. There's a lot of reasons I really like them.
Yeah.
Um,
It's really clear your passion for them. Thank you for sharing that. That was I love turtles just because I mentioned it's like my spirit creature. I got a tattoo, a turtle on my arm, and it's just
yeah,
an important part of my own experience and journey, and your passion just shines through in what you just shared, and that's awesome. That's so awesome, and
yeah.
that you were able to find that passion as a young college student as well, and carry that through your career is really really wonderful. So
And I can't emphasize enough how important those mentors were that like let me pursue that passion too. It
sure,
wasn't just my parents, but these mentors that, saw that I cared about them, that I was interested, and were like, you know what? Okay, we'll do this.
yeah. Any
Because I
one or
think it was
two
kind of
stand
scary
out?
for them.
Any one or two of those mentors stand out to you as anything
Well,
special or
Kurt Richardson he was the head of the wetlands center at Duke for
yeah.
so many years, and his training was as a biogeochemist. So he studied how nutrients and chemicals cycled in wetlands. So for him to see have faith in me and that I could do it, and we ultimately published a paper from that. It's my one turtle paper that's been published.
Yeah,
I
that was
really
during
am
your master's
grateful.
program.
That was during my master's. Yeah,
Yeah.
so grateful to him for that.
Yeah,
So
that's wonderful. Well, I'm grateful to him as well, because without his help, I wouldn't have met you in San Antonio. And my
yeah.
recollection was, just as a sidebar story, how you got hired at the River Authority. There was a little, like, you met Suzanne Scott, the general manager, on a plane or something like that?
Not
And
Suzanne Scott. The head of HR was who I met on
okay,
a plane,
yeah,
flying back and forth to San Antonio. So
yeah,
I but at that point, I had sort of set up some informational interviews the summer before I started there, and I knew that I had set some up at various places in San Antonio because I knew I was going to be moving there, and I really wanted to work for Sarah. So
yeah. I couldn't
I kind of
remember who it
kept
was. But I do
checking.
remember
Yes,
hearing, yeah, we
yeah,
got somebody for you to hire. She's a great. You gotta hire this person. So I couldn't remember who it was. If it came from
yes,
Suzanne or HR, but yeah, I do remember the story of you meeting
yeah,
somebody and they being so incredibly impressed with you in that short time on a plane that they knew we had to bring you on board. And yeah, it was great having you there and working with you for that short time.
yeah,
So so we're back now. Let's catch up to maybe a little closer to present day. You're in your Southern
yeah.
Appalachian Mountains, finishing up your PhD, and you can maybe pick up where we left off a little while ago.
Yeah, so when I was working there, one of my favorite things that I did during my PhD was I mentored something like 13 or 14 undergraduate students. As I was doing my research, I involved them in my research. I mentored them in their own research projects. And I knew going into my PhD that I wanted to teach. I'd known that from before, but I really was excited about working with undergraduates. And so when I was finishing up my PhD, actually, it's just funny how things connect and opportunities connect. When I had first moved to Atlanta, I couldn't start my PhD for a year, worked for Blue Heron Nature Preserve. There was the president of the board at the time, his name was Charlie Bobby, and he worked for Oglethorpe University. And I knew that it was very focused on undergraduate education. So I was really excited. I wanted, that was my goal throughout my PhD, was to be able to work there. And
Yeah,
as I was getting ready to defend my dissertation, um, an ad came from a friend of mine who I met at Duke, who then lived in Atlanta. It's just, life is just a web of
yeah,
people.
these weird
And
connections. Yeah,
she passed this along, and it was an opportunity for to be an adjunct and instructor at Oglethorpe, and to teach an ecology class. And so as I was finishing up my PhD, I developed a freshwater ecology class, and so because that was really the focus, and my PhD was very much focused on freshwater ecosystems being the primary ecosystem that freshwater turtles
sure,
live
sure.
in. And so I got an opportunity I got hired there, and I continued to work as an adjunct instructor there, and I love that job. But I'm not exactly sure how it happened. It may be because at one point I had tried to take my students to the Amphibian Foundation,
Yeah,
and we couldn't connect because it was during COVID and there were a lot of challenges, as you know, especially putting students on a bus. Um,
sure.
but in February of 2023, I got an email from Mark Mandika, who is the founder. He and his wife Crystal Mandika have co-founded the Amphibian Foundation, and they contacted me and said, "Hey, we're looking for an urban ecologist. Are you?" And it is a part-time position,
Yeah,
and they said, "Are you interested?" And it's like like when you hear something like this, and it's like all the smiles come back because the opportunity to work with these organisms again, because
yeah,
I love teaching and I love being in the classroom, but there's this part of me that really craved being in the field and doing research and really just being out there in these ecosystems again. And
yeah,
um it was a really exciting opportunity. And so I said yes to that. And so that's when I started as the urban ecologist at the
And was
Amphibian
this
Foundation.
21? It was after post
It was
pandemic.
23.
23.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
2023. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Last
Nice.
last February, about a year and a half is
Yeah.
how long
Right
I've been
on.
there.
Yeah.
And it's been really fun. It's been a really fun job.
Yeah. So you stay incredibly busy. You got the part-time job at the Amphibian Foundation, the
Yep.
still teaching
Yep.
undergrad students and raising three wonderful kids, keeping you busy as well. So
Yes.
you don't have a whole lot of downtime in your life, it sounds like.
No, but my grandfather, who worked until he was 93, I think,
Yeah. Wow.
told me that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And
Yeah.
I tell my students when they talk to me about career advice, and really anybody who's willing to listen to me, that how important it is to find a job that you just love going to every day. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel lucky that I have two jobs, well, really three jobs. I'm at
Sure.
the one job a lot, the at home job a lot, but
Sure.
I love going to my other two jobs. It's just
Yeah.
really fun.
Yeah.
It's really fun.
That is such great advice, and I believe wholeheartedly in that advice. A guest I just had on the show a couple weeks ago, his father told him the same advice in his career path and life path. I think that's really wise way of looking at finding that passion and finding that thing that you
Yeah,
really enjoy, so that it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like a burden to go do this thing. It's more
yeah.
like, I get to go do this thing and they're
Mhm,
paying
mhm.
me.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I also appreciate your change in your PhD program to go for ecology. Obviously, you're well aware of this too, but the idea of learning how to protect freshwater ecosystems and then teaching the rest of us how to do that is not only beneficial, obviously, for the turtles that you love so much, but it's the whole ecosystem, everything that needs that
Mhm.
ecosystem, every other species, including us humans that are interconnected to these systems, whether we think we are or not, we're part of. And so what a great way to broaden your approach to your research and your education to benefit not just the one species that you love so much, but the whole system. So
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah.
That's great. So tell me a little bit then about the Amphibian Foundation. What does it do? What does it accomplish? What do you do there? And
Yeah, no, the Amphibian Foundation is just a fantastic organization. It's a nonprofit that, as I mentioned, was started by Mark and Crystal Mandica, and it started in the basement of their home.
nice.
They're very passionate people, and so that's another reason it's really fun to work there because when you're with people that really truly care about what they do, it's just a great place. And the way that it started was so the Amphibian Foundation has a really broad mission statement, which is to um, help with the conservation of amphibians given the global decline in
Mm-hmm.
amphibians.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a paper that was published in 2023 that indicates that 40.7% of amphibians are threatened globally. And
Wow.
so amphibians are a very threatened group. And the way that the Amphibian Foundation started was with a species called the frosted flatwood salamander, which is a very charismatic salamander species that lives in the coastal plains of the southeastern U.S.,
Okay.
including Georgia. And it is native to the longleaf pine ecosystem, which is this ecosystem that was dominated by longleaf pine, but also commonly experienced a lot of burning historically, and that caused these kind of because of the burn, caused these open understories that supported a lot of
Mm.
wetland species.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when European colonization occurred in Georgia and other parts of the southeastern U.S., these were places that were some of the first two ecosystems to be removed because they were great farming land. The wood was used, and so a lot of the species that live and depend on these ecosystems, and then also the problem with being dependent on a frequent burning regime is not very popular when you have people living nearby.
Sure, sure.
And so there are many species that are endangered or threatened that are native to this longleaf pine ecosystem, including the frosted flatwood salamanders. So the Amphibian Foundation was the first organization to do ex situ breeding, so breeding of the frosted flatwood salamander off site. Since then, it's expanded to include the gopher frog and the striped newt, and there's a lot of different things that the Amphibian Foundation now does, but those are some of the species from the coastal plain that they really focused on. And something that sort of came out of COVID was the urban ecology program, because what
Mm-hmm.
happened was when COVID hit, all of the species that we worked with were in the coastal plain of Georgia. So, but you could no longer pack a bunch of people into a car and drive to the
Mm-hmm.
coastal plain.
Yeah.
So instead, the person who had my position and kind of did some other jobs within the Amphibian Foundation said, okay, well, what do we do now? And they decided to do urban surveys within the Atlanta area. And those surveys were of reptiles and amphibians, and they were kind of these presence absence, and primarily took place for the most part in public parks, so city parks, county parks, and then a couple of partner organizations. And that's kind of how the urban ecology program got started at the Amphibian Foundation, was not being able to take people to the coastal plain of Georgia.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, so that's how the program got started.
So what now in your role there as an urban ecologist, what is kind of a work life there for you on your part-time basis, but what are some of the things that you're doing? You obviously mentioned wanting to be back out in the field. So are you leading surveys? Are you doing education out in the field? A
Yes.
little bit of both, or like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so when I tell people kind of that I'm in urban ecology, I wasn't hired, as we have a whole team of people who do education at the
Mm-hmm.
Amphibian Foundation. They run camps, they do certification programs online. I'm not in that group, but when you do field work out in urban ecosystems, your job has to be um, a large portion of
Sure.
education, because everybody who
It's
passes you
random
wants to know
strangers.
what
Yeah.
you're doing. And
Right.
so they
Right.
ask you about it. And I always stop and I tell people whatever it is they want to know about amphibians, about the ecosystem. And so in that sense, I'm still doing education, but the job title is
Yeah.
a little more about some field research. So as I mentioned, this kind of started as these presence absence surveys. So people would go out to the park, they would look under logs, they would look in streams to see what species were there, and it was marked presence if they found one, or they found 100, and it was marked absence if they didn't find it.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, the original survey was reptiles and amphibians.
It's
When
mostly
I
like
came
citizen
on,
science volunteers
no, so
or staff.
this was led by a staff member, and we have this really great program called the Research Bridge Program, which
Mm-hmm.
helps to train uh, students, people who are interested in going into a career in conservation, in amphibians, or reptiles.
Yeah.
And so those students help out in the field that's led by the Amphibian Foundation
Yeah. High
staff
school,
member.
college age kids or
Not high school, typically, but usually college. It might be someone
yeah.
taking a gap year. It might be somebody
Nice.
coming back to a career, um,
Okay.
who did something else.
That's great. Yeah.
And so when I came on board and I met with Mark and Crystal for the first time, I said, okay, what would you like me to do in this job?
Sure.
And when Mark was talking to me, he was saying, well, this is what we did in the past, but what we'd really like to do is focus a little more on amphibians because we're the Amphibian Foundation.
Makes
And
sense.
so one of the groups of organisms um, that's really threatened in urban ecosystems and that are really cool species are a group of salamanders called mole salamanders. And that's sort of the generic term for the whole group.
Yeah.
And there are two in particular that are found within the Atlanta metro area. And so during most of the year, have designed some studies to try and better understand where these species live, um, what kinds of wetlands they live in. Sorry, I should back up. They all live in something called ephemeral wetlands, which
Okay.
are wetlands that are temporary in nature. And so during the rainy part of the year, which in Atlanta is kind of during late fall, winter time, the ponds fill with water. And
Okay.
then depends on the year, by April, May, June, they start to dry up. And the reason that these salamanders prefer this habitat is because they're very susceptible to being eaten by fish. So if you're a fish, you can't live in a pond
These ponds.
that
Yeah.
dries up.
Yeah.
And so these salamanders prefer those habitats. And so our studies are focused on marbled salamanders and spotted salamanders, and they
Yeah.
have two very different life histories, but they both use ephemeral wetlands.
Is is the use of the ephemeral wetlands what makes them cool, or because you said earlier these are really cool species? So
Yes,
what's your
I
tell
want
me some more of your
everyone.
passion around these cool creatures. We got to understand why they're cool.
So part of it is that they look really cool. They're
Yeah.
large. They're large, beefy salamanders. And if you came across one, like if you
Yeah.
lifted a log and you found one of these guys, most people don't know that they exist. And part of the
Yeah.
reason they don't know they exist is because they spend a lot of their time underground
Yeah.
during a lot of the year. And then they emerge. And actually, if you live in the northeastern US, you probably know spotted salamanders pretty well because unlike the southeast, in the northeast, and I think it probably has to do with the timing of when these pools fill relative to snow.
Sure.
There are these mass migrations of spotted salamanders that come, and sometimes, like in some communities, they'll even close the roads on these nights that spotted salamanders migrate. Um, in the southeast, we don't see that same like synchrony in terms of when they come out.
Yeah.
Um, but if you saw one, I want everybody to Google a marbled salamander and a spotted salamander. And if you don't think they look really cool, you can write to me afterwards because you won't believe they're
Send me
just so neat.
pictures. I'll include them. I'll include the pictures on the show notes to the podcast
Yes.
and on the video portion of the podcast. I can edit them in as you're telling people to go look for them. So send me some
Okay.
pictures and we'll include
I will
them. I
I will
can't wait to
send you
see
some
them.
pictures.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're amazing. And they just have really cool life history. So they're actually very different from each other in
Yeah.
some ways.
Yeah.
So the marbled salamanders, so there's issues with timing. If you live underground, but you breed in a pool that's only sometimes there, there's some challenges.
Yeah.
So the marbled salamanders, the way that they approach this is they come out and with the timing that I'll use will be for the Atlanta area, but they come out in Atlanta around September, October,
Mm-hmm.
and they hunker down under logs or cover objects that are within the pool. So the pools are currently dry, but they're anticipating they will fill with water. They lay
Sure.
their eggs and they guard them and they hang out with those eggs until that pond fills with water. Now, the upside of this strategy is that when the pond fills with water, you've got a head start because your eggs are already laid, and essentially when the water hits them, they hatch and they're ready to go. The downside is that if your pond never fills with water
Mm,
or fills really late, you're sort
yeah.
of you're sort of out of luck.
Yeah.
Spotted salamanders, on the other hand, they take a different approach. They come out in the wintertime when the ponds are already full,
Mm-hmm.
and they breed in wet ponds. So the upside of this is that there's water there because you come out, you go to the pond, there's water, you breed, you lay your eggs. The downside of that is one, if you lay eggs in a pond with marbled salamanders, it is possible that they can eat you. The larvae can eat you because they've already had that head
They've already
start.
had, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, the other issue is that you better get out of there before that pond dries up.
Yeah.
And so even when we were doing our spring surveys this year, we there were some places where we would have a dry time in the winter, and you'd see kind of a stranded spotted salamander egg mass. Oh, buddy, bad spot.
Yeah.
Um, and so they have these two different life strategies. So we know they live in ephemeral wetlands, but what we don't know as much in urban areas particularly is what other features of those wetlands are going to potentially affect their presence, their density, um, whether they're reproducing. And so we're measuring things like with the marbled salamanders, we're measuring things like how wet is first of all, how many cover objects, that's what we call them, things
Mm-hmm.
like logs. In some places, we find them under tires or trash. We look under anything that could be
Yeah.
considered a cover object. We look under those, and we measure the soil moisture. We count how many are there and what type. We count how decayed and the size of those particular cover objects. Um, with spotted salamanders, we look at things like what their egg masses are attached to. So is there a certain substrate? Do they only have rocks to attach to, or are they attached to some kind of aquatic vegetation? And we're also taking measurements that we haven't had a chance to analyze yet, but things like canopy cover. So
Mm-hmm.
how many trees are over top of that pond, and potentially shading it, which can
Yeah.
potentially affect both species. But we also hope to do some GIS-based analyses to look at where is that pond located relative to other types of land cover, and could that potentially be affecting the presence of those species at that particular wetland? Because if you remember, these are species that spend most of their
Yeah.
time in terrestrial habitats.
Right.
And so if they have to cross roads, or their terrestrial habitat is physically separated in some way from that breeding habitat, that can potentially affect their ability to persist in that
Sure.
habitat long term.
Sure. I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong though, but I'm assuming climate change and changing weather patterns is a threat to these salamanders as well.
Yes,
If the rain
yes.
patterns are changing and the wet seasons and dry
So
seasons are
absolutely,
changing.
because of so thinking about
Yeah.
the timing of when water comes, uh, there's all kinds of, yes. So climate can definitely
Yeah.
affect that because of that hydrology of the pond, when it
Right.
fills, how much it fills, and how long it lasts, are definitely going to be affected by climate change.
Right. And are these creatures, again, a story I'm imagining that I don't know if it's true or not, but I'm assuming they're in some ways like a canary in the coal mine when it relates to stormwater runoff and pollutants. If what these ponds are being filled up with is runoff from
Yeah,
streets and other areas. You mentioned tires and things they're
yeah,
turning
yeah.
into
So
their breeding grounds. But if that also comes with risks, I'm assuming, as well as how the pollutants in our urban areas might be hindering their reproductive rates.
yes, so not something that we're directly measuring, but things like, for example, that we're hoping to measure something called impervious surface cover. So how
Mm-hmm.
much water can get into the ground in the areas around that pond, because that can be a good metric to sort of approximate chemicals that might be coming in from the surrounding environment.
Sure.
And they are and amphibians, because they take in so much through their skin, are particularly susceptible to chemicals that are found in urban ecosystems.
Sure. Hence the
And
high mortality rate of 40+% that you
right.
extinction threat rate that you talked about. So
And I wanted to mention one other project that we
yeah,
are
please.
working on, which is not dealing with ephemeral wetland species. So we have those two projects that we're kind of intensively working on. Two other things. One is a project that is looking at how grazing by sheep to remove invasive
Hmm.
plant species, might affect terrestrial salamanders. So there's some salamanders that never use aquatic ecosystems at all.
Hmm.
And instead, they reproduce under moist logs and cover objects within forested ecosystems. So we have one study that's looking at how, whether or not grazing sheep and their removal of these invasive plant species might affect terrestrial salamanders.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then the other major project that we're trying to get off the ground is a community science project, where
Nice.
because right now I'm feeling it's kind of sad, because I feel like frogs are being neglected. I just started, so we're kind of, we're trying to get this ball rolling, right,
Yeah.
of these ephemeral wetland studies. But one thing that we're hoping to do is to actually bring in community scientists in the metro Atlanta area to help us through frog call monitoring, to be able to see what's happening with our frogs in urban Atlanta as well.
Nice. Nice. Well, Maury, you're doing a lot, and I could continue to kind of, I'm gonna say it, nerd out with you on this stuff because it's so fascinating to me as well. Hopefully that wasn't offensive to you,
No.
but I do want to be respectful of your time as well. So let me transition into kind of giving you the opportunity, like what can people do to support the Amphibian Foundation there in Atlanta where you are, or amphibians in their urban area wherever they may happen to live. What are some calls to action that you would ask the listeners to do to take your passion and go do something positive then for the community that they live in?
Yeah. So while I would always encourage people to support the Amphibian Foundation, which you can do financially. You can also, there's a number of certification courses that we offer that people can sign up for. They have a cost associated with them, but it's a way that you can learn more about amphibians. And most of those are designed for an adult audience. The online courses are. Um, but I really encourage people to get to know their amphibians, their local amphibians, because um, I think that it's so important for people to know what the amphibians that are living around them, because they're probably really cool. And I could tell you all day about the marbled and the spotted salamanders, which, if you live in the East Coast, probably are near you. If you don't live on the East Coast, then you have your own amphibians to really get excited about. And so some things that I encourage people to do, there's kind of a range, right? So if you have the financial resources to support local wildlife organizations that conserve these species,
Yeah.
that is one way. But also supporting land organizations that conserve freshwater ecosystems, especially ephemeral wetlands, because they're not protected by the Clean Water Act, and so they're the
Yeah.
first things that get destroyed with development. Um, but you don't have to have money to support amphibians. There's also things that homeowners can do. There's a lot of things that homeowners can do. Some things that I wanted to mention are one, having native plants in your yard, because
Hmm.
amphibians eat insects. And insects prefer to eat native plants than non-native plants. So the more native plants you have, the more native insects you have, the more amphibians you have. A second one is reducing or eliminating use of chemicals on your lawn or your property, because as I mentioned, because those all run downhill into freshwater ecosystems where a lot of these species are breeding,
Yeah.
and it gets taken into their skin. That's one way. A third one that's probably less popular, but is definitely one that needs to be mentioned, is not letting your cat outside.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when they think about cats, home cats, they think about the effect on birds, but actually they have a really significant effect on amphibians. And there's studies that have been done all over the world about this, but one that I was reading that was just published was done in Australia, and they found that there's something like 92 million frogs per year that are killed just by
Wow.
feral cats.
Wow.
And so that's something. But even if you don't own a home, you don't have money to donate, you can still support amphibians by getting to know your local amphibians. You can do this through something like your master naturalist or a lot of master gardeners classes will talk about this.
Yeah.
You might be able to get involved in a community science program near you, whether that's something that actually directly monitors amphibians or something that monitors their ecosystem, like an adopt a stream program. We have a great adopt a stream program here in Georgia. Um, and and also, one other thing, if you decide
Yeah.
you want to look for amphibians, make sure that you know how to handle them in a way that will not harm them. So things like thinking about, if you're going to roll a log, how to carefully roll a log. You want to roll it away from you in case there's snakes, or towards you, so that if there happen to be
Sure.
snakes underneath, they escape.
They go the other way. Yeah.
And that you put it back the way it is, and also that you use hand sanitizer, which sounds counterintuitive, but there's a lot of diseases that are part of what's threatening amphibians right now,
Hmm.
and so making sure that you don't spread any
Hmm.
diseases to other
Yeah.
amphibians.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that your listeners can do, whether they, on a wide range. And maybe lastly, if you're a parent, supporting your kids if they are excited about amphibians.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yeah. Just as you were supported. Yeah. That's
yes,
wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, Maura, thank you so much for your time today and the great tips and advice that you've just given us. I end every show with the same three questions, and these are questions about hope. We talk on this program about sustainability issues, and sometimes these subjects are hard, right? You're talking about climate change, and urban pollution,
yeah,
maybe causing the extinction of these amazing creatures. So that's a difficult thing to discuss, but I want to always try to end each show following the great tips that our guests bring to with a little bit of hope. So I'm going to ask you three questions, and kind of just give your first gut reaction to the question. It's kind of like a rapid fire.
okay,
And we'll just kind of go through these three questions about hope, and hope being defined as a future that you can envision, but you also have some agency to help make it become a reality, that you have some ability, not without hardships or difficulties, and it may not be
yeah.
achievable, but it is something that you have some agency to try to bring to life. So the first question is, what is your vision for a better future? And that can be for you personally, professionally, or for the world. What's your hopeful vision for the future?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, just in my own work. Um, my vision for the future is that all people have equal access to the resources that they need to be happy and support themselves, and that when that's achieved, there's still this room to coexist with diverse species, that they still can be there and wonder us, have just bring us wonder.
Yeah. So why is that your vision for a better future?
Um, because I think that is, it's a future that has a lot of empathy and compassion both for other people and for the world around us. And I think that if we all came to that place, it would be, I mean, it would just be, I think if we find that empathy and compassion, that would allow us to get to that place.
Yeah, right on. So last question, imagine we get there. Imagine we're living in the future you just described, of full of empathy and compassion, and people living in diverse communities with diverse creatures. And how does that make you feel now that that vision has come to be?
Makes me feel great. Yeah, it makes me feel great. I I like to keep that in my mind as I'm working, because it it does fill me with hope that that can be achieved. So yeah,
Yeah, wonderful. Well, that fills me with hope hearing you talk about it. And I'm going to do my little piece to help us get there. So thank you so much, Maura. Dr. Dudley, thank you for
thank
being
you.
here on the show and sharing your expertise and your passion and your hopes for a better, brighter future for all of us. So appreciate it, Maura.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much for
much.
having me. It's been great to talk with you, and it's always fun to talk about amphibians. They're amazing. So look up yours. Look up your local one.
I'm going to. I'm going to. Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Well, all right. That brings us to the end of another inspiring episode of Stories Sustain Us. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Maura Dudley for joining me today and sharing her incredible journey and invaluable insights into amphibian conservation and the importance of protecting our freshwater ecosystems. After we stopped the recording, there were a couple of things Dr. Dudley wanted to share, and I told her I'd be happy to include her additional thoughts in my closing. First, she wanted everyone to know that while her work is largely focused on salamanders, as she shared in the interview, her work with the Amphibian Foundation has allowed her to be certified to handle venomous snakes, which is something she's always wanted to do. In her current position, she also still gets to survey freshwater turtles during the summer. So I'm really glad for her that she gets to continue pursuing her passions for snakes and turtles while she's also saving salamanders. So, that snake handling stuff, that's not really for me. But as I mentioned, turtles are my spirit animal along with the great blue heron. But since we've been talking about turtles in this episode, let me tell you why they're important to me. And I'll save the story about great blue herons for another time. Yeah, I first kind of learned about turtles and fell in love with turtles when I was a child. And my mother taught me a lot, and some of the things that she taught me were grit and determination, and pick yourself up if you get knocked down and just keep moving forward even when life gets difficult. And when I was a kid, how she taught me that lesson was through the parable of the tortoise and the hare. And that lesson, stuck with me all through my life. That idea of, life gets hard sometimes, and that's okay. Just keep going. Just make progress, even if it's slowly, one step, one day at a time. Just keep moving forward. And that has paid a lot of dividends in my life. So I thank my mom for teaching me that as a kid, using that tortoise and hare parable. Now, there's another parable I've learned as an adult, maybe in the last decade or so, and it's a parable about turtles. It's a Buddhist parable. There's several different versions of this parable, but the one that I first learned about goes something like this. The parable asks you to imagine there's a turtle swimming underwater in this vast ocean, and this particular turtle only needs to surface for air once every 1,000 years. Now, on the surface of this vast ocean, there's a ring floating, and it's being tossed by the tides and blown about by the wind and the currents. And the parable asks you to really kind of question, what are the odds of when this turtle surfaces for air once every 1,000 years, that it will surface inside of that small ring that's been floating around for 1,000 years as well. Now, again, there's different versions of this parable. There's one that I read about a turtle in a lake surfacing in a bucket. There's another one I saw about a blind turtle climbing up onto a particular log to sun itself. So they're all kind of different versions, but they all drive at the same point and the same lesson. And for me, the parable that I first learned about, the idea of what are the odds of this turtle surfacing for air once every 1,000 years into this ring. Well, it's incredibly rare. It's incredibly precious. And that's the point. The point is that's life. Life is incredibly rare. Life is incredibly precious, and we should treat it as such. We should treat it with honor and appreciation because it's a gift. This life that we get to live as humans on this planet with all of these other forms of life, that's all a rare, precious thing, and it should be appreciated and honored and taken care of. And that's why I got a tattoo of a turtle on my arm, because it's something that I wanted to remind myself every day that life is a precious gift and it should be appreciated, and there should be gratitude for it. And you should actively do things to try to make your life and the lives of others better, because it's such a rare, precious gift. So this brings me to the second thing that Dr. Dudley asked me to share in this closing. There's a quote that has special meaning for Dr. Dudley. And to me, the quote's really relatable to the turtle parable about the significance of life, or the reverence of life. The quote is from Baba Diom, a Senegalese forestry engineer. Baba Diom was quoted in 1968 saying, "In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught." I, for one, am grateful for people like Baba Diom and Dr. Moore Dudley, who are teaching us about ecosystems and other species so we can understand them, come to love them, and ultimately work together to conserve them. So thank you, Dr. Dudley, for joining me today. I really appreciate your insights and the important work that you're doing. Now, let me give you a quick plug for next week's episode. We're going from Georgia to Arizona, where we'll hear from the Deputy Director of the Arts and Culture Department in Phoenix. It's a captivating conversation about the intersection of art and sustainability. You're not going to want to miss it, so check it out on July 16th, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or on our website, storiessustainus.com. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and follow Stories Sustain Us. As always, I would very much appreciate it. And until next time, I'm Steven Schauer. Please take care of yourself and each other. Take care.